next presenter is John Guido. Practices forester. That's interesting. BCTS Grand Forks. He's going to discuss the current tenures and harvesting plans as well as upcoming potential timber sales within our watershed. So, John. It's a sheep, yes. Apologies. There you go.
Thank you. That's not a very good map, but I will explain what it is. And it's also up on the wall in the back. My name is John Guido, and I'm here today with my partner in planning, Ingrid Russell, who has disappeared on me, my backup partner in times of stress, who's there to back me up when I make this public presentation. But I'm sure she'll be back soon. I'm very happy to be here today, and not just because of that great lunch, but I'm also kind of excited to be on a YouTube video. My kids are going to think I'm really cool now and tell them that I'm on YouTube. So bonus. As mentioned, I'm going to talk about BC timber sales, the current and future plans that we have for our Christina Lake operating area, which is the area you're particularly interested in. But first I thought it might be helpful if I give you a little background on what Ingrid and I do. And also a little bit about the organization we work for, which is BC Timber Sales. So Ingrid and I are involved in harvest planning. I work out of the office in Grand Forks. I work along with 9 other people out of that office. And as well, we're not open to the public. Connie works in a similar office behind Sears BC there. There she is. There's my backup. So we developed timber sale licenses. And a timber sale is a block, one block to several blocks that are grouped together and they're sold out on the public market. They're sold competitively and they're awarded usually to the highest bidder. The license itself comes with a number of obligations, contractual obligations, maps, clauses, a stack of paperwork that the contract logger is required to adhere to. And Ingrid's and my job is to make sure that those contracts and plans and obligations meet all of the legal requirements and that they also consider and protect the other resource values that they're honoring. Oh, and yes, we're also required to refer our plans to other members of the public who may be interested. And so that's why we're here today, is that you have expressed an interest in our plans. So we are here to talk to you about them. Now, what is BC Timber Sales? Well, BC Timber Sales is an arm underneath the umbrella of the Ministry of Forest, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations. And Connie is in one of those arms. I'm in another arm. And then we also have Wildfire Management Branch. Let's see here. Okay, so BC Timber Sales was originally the Small Business Forest Enterprise Program. Some of you might be familiar with that older language. The Small Business Forest Enterprise Program morphed into BC Timber Sales at the time of the Softwood Lumber Agreement. And the purpose of BC Timber Sales is to provide a market price for public timber. The government uses that price to help determine what companies like Interfor, Tyler, pay for the right to harvest crown timber. Timber sales are also purchased by local logging contractors. Some of you may be familiar with these people who live and work in our community. They harvest that on these blocks, they follow this stack of paper and plans and legal obligations that they have to adhere to. And when they've completed that whole extensive exercise, then they take their logs and they market it out. And then they're going to people like Interfork, Klesnikov, Porcupine Lumber, and Boggin Brothers in Midway, to name just a few, to sell and market their wood to get the best possible price they can. It's a very competitive business, and they pay quite a good price for the privilege to harvest our timber. Okay, so these are the areas that we work with, BC Timber Sales. That's not a very good way of presenting a map with all that detail, I realize that. And there's some maps in the back corner there for you to look at later if you like. The point of this map is just to show, I don't know if you can really see it, but the gray areas on there are the areas that we operate in the boundary. The outside area represents our timber supply area, and that's how the government calculates the amount of wood that we're allowed to harvest. And we share this harvest land base with primarily Interfor. So BCTS and Interfor are the prime licensees that work out of this timber supply area. Now I think I have to press a button here. Looks like I forgot to ask Barbara which one. Hopefully here. Just enter? Yeah. Okay. Whoops. That worked. Okay. Alrighty. So this is the operating area that you're most interested in, that we're working in this year actually. The pink outlines the Christina Lake operating area. Those green squiggly areas on there are not beasts or milfoil. They're actually logging blocks. There's 12 of them, and they represent 2 timber sales. Our operating area, the most southern part of our operating area is close to the town of Christina Lake. We go west up to the height of land, and then further north right up to the top of Christina Lake there, and over to the west, east, I'm a forester, I should know my directions, and east up to Gladstone Park and along the shoreline of Christina Lake. Current timber sales. As I mentioned, there's 2 timber sales in our operating area that were sold this year. They were sold to local contractors. One of those timber sales started working last week. He started harvesting one of his blocks. And he should be finished work in another 2 to 3 months. They're pretty fast, efficient operators, as they need to be. The other timber sale will start off probably shortly after spring breakup, which happens in April, May. And he as well will probably take a couple months to complete work, and then they'll be out of there. The value of these timber sales, the price that was bid for that wood, I thought you might be interested in hearing, totaled about $1.8 million. And that's a considerable amount of money, and that goes directly to the government, into their coffers. Okay.
That amount was for the 2 lots?
That $1.8 million was what was their competitive bid total for the value of all the timber that they're harvesting off those 12 blocks.
Oh, 12 lots.
12 blocks. This is a close-up satellite photo of our operations. It shows that the blocks are a considerable distance from the lake, approximately 1 kilometer and further. The blue dots on that map indicate water intakes. Our cut blocks are in 4 watersheds, meaning the area where the water drains. That's the Spooner Creek, Gill Creek. Gill Creek is the further northern drainage. Then there's Spooner Creek, Bark Creek, and I missed one. There's 4. Spooner. Oh, Stewart. And there's Stewart, big one in the middle.
Which are the 2 that you're working on now?
We're working on two timber sales that fall within 4 watersheds. And the 4 watersheds are Gill, Stewart, Bart, and Spooner. Is that the question?
No, the 2 that you're actually actively working on now.
Well,
That has started off thinking.
so one timber sale has started, one block. So he started logging. Oh, which block has he started working on?
Which ones?
What I was told is he's going to start working on the furthest northwestern block. So I suspect it's. Oh, there's a block missing from this map. I see that now. Right on the top, above these 2 blocks here, right up on the top far corner of this map is where they're starting operations, or have started operations last week.
Why I'm asking is Gill Creek is our water source, and I'm wondering if you're actually logging right now on Gill Creek.
None
answer is
of
no.
the blocks, right? We looked at all the site plans and stuff like that. None of the blocks actually have water that's in the blocks themselves that would enter into Gill Creek. They don't. Yeah, they don't directly flow into Gill Creek.
Yeah, so to give you a bit of an idea on that, Gill Creek itself, the block that's closest to Gill Creek is that one.
Yeah.
Right there?
Yeah.
Did you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have any connection to Gill Creek. So when I say there's those watersheds, whoops. Oh, okay, that'll help. It's more fun to jump up and down, but okay. That one right there, that'll help.
And our water intake, you say, is blue,
Right.
is the
So then,
blue
yeah,
dot.
your water intake, where'd that guy go? Oh, there he is.
It's right there.
So your water intakes are here along Gill Creek?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the block itself is within your watershed, but it's not, it doesn't mean it's connected to the stream. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
What about road systems?
Okay, good question. Boy, people are already excited. They're asking questions before I even get done here. That suggests to me that people are very interested in that. So let's see, I was going to talk about that, but let me finish talking about the licenses first, just because I'm going to get all gibbled up here if I bounce around too much. So the water licensees, I hope this doesn't come as a surprise to you, but it might, because you would have been notified of our development in this area in 2009. That's when we sent out the referral letters and every person who has a licensed water intake would have received a letter notifying them that we have this proposed development. And they would have been given 60 days to provide comments back to BC Timber Sales. What often happens is people sometimes tend to not really pay too much attention to the letters, and then afterwards when harvesting starts, they say, oh, what's going on up there? How come you didn't tell me? Well, sometimes, like in this circumstance, you were notified in 2009, and here we are in 2012, and we're starting logging. So that's quite a bit of time to pass.
You might just want to do a little recap on forest stewardship plans and the year stuff, so people can kind of understand why there's that gap in there.
The gap is because we develop these areas, lay them out during the field season. After we lay them out, then we determine who has an interest in our development area. It can be range users, water users, Grandview Wilderness Society, trappers and guides, people like that. And then we send out, we packages together, and we list all of these interested people, and we send out letters to them and notifying them that we have this development in this area. And that's so that we're relatively early along the stages of development so that they have an opportunity to provide some input into what we're doing. So we do put a time frame on that. When you get the letter, it'll say you've got about 60 days to comment. And then after that, we take in those comments and we try to consider that, take that consideration into what we're doing. Did that answer your question?
That was just so you know why you get that letter so far in advance, and that's the time that you need to say anything if you have.
Correct. And then our sales kind of go into a pot, and each year we sit down and decide which ones will we market and sell this year. And so we have about 2 years worth of inventory. We pull from that inventory, and every year we're developing more sales. We pull from that inventory, and then we offer that out in our timber sale for that year. And so these came up. They were sold this year, and harvesting will be completed on all of these blocks probably by early fall of this year. And talking about water, you might be interested in what we do to protect your water quality. We are legally required to protect the water resource, amongst many other resources. If there is a stream nearby or a little tributary in our blocks, we are required to create riparian management areas and reserve timber. And the amount of timber that we reserve in those riparian management areas, it depends on the size of the stream. Is it a fish stream? Is it used for water? There's a number of criteria, and that determines how large the riparian management zone will be and how much will be behind as far as reserved timber within that riparian management zone. For this area, we also have a hydrologist that's on contract for BC Timber Sales. And if we're going into an area where we think there might be an impact on the hydrology, we call up our hydrologists and we ask them to take a look at our watersheds and to walk the watersheds. For example, in this area, we were talking about Gill Creek. Our hydrologist was hired to take a look at Gill Creek. He came out with a couple of people from our field team. They drove up to the top of Gill Creek where it is initiated, and then they walked the entire length of Gill Creek down to Christina Lake and assess the stream itself and how resilient it would be to harvesting impacts. He did write a report up for us, and if you're interested, you can contact me and I can provide you a copy of that report. If you have a water intake at the bottom, you might be interested in that. So his report confirmed that Gill Creek is very resilient and stable, and that it's unlikely that our harvesting could have any impact on it. We do have some, as far as road, someone asked me about road construction. We're utilizing the Stewart Creek Forest Service Road. It's most of the access in this area is very well established, as you know, if you're up there and hunting. A lot of people like to go up there hunting. There's a number of roads up there. We have a few short little spur roads going out to our blocks that are going to be constructed, but it's very little construction is happening. And that's always a concern to people because roads really have the biggest impact. Another high quality out here, value that we manage for is the visuals. Christina Lake is considered a sensitive view area. It's visually sensitive, and we're legally obligated to manage for that. All of these blocks were modeled, put in a computer model and modeled, and we determined that you really can't see these very well. They're going to have a very little visual impact from the lake because of the topography and the distance that they are from the lake. So you'll be quite happy about that. In conclusion, as far as our future plans are concerned, we don't have plans currently for any more plans for the Christina Lake operating area at present. Our plans go out 2 to 3 years, and there are no timber sales in those plans for 2 to 3 years. However, plans are flexible and they change, and there's a very good possibility that we will be looking at this area. But from my talk today, you've got a pretty good idea that from the time that we first go out, look at an area, develop a timber sale, and put it up to the market takes a considerable length of time. So that kind of gives you some idea that even if we go out there this field season and start looking, it's going to be several years down the road before we'll actually have a block under the chopping block, so to speak. So I think I've covered everything that I wanted to kind of touch on, and I suspect you have a few questions for me. And yes.
Is replanting in your plans when you make them too?
Yes. Ingrid and myself, we work in development and putting together plans. After our blocks are harvested, there's another department within our office that deals with all of the silviculture obligations that come after harvesting. And we are legislated to replant in a very short time, and then there's another time frame we have to make to ensure that all those blocks are free growing. And that is done by BC Timber Sales for the blocks that are harvested by the logging contractors.
So is the logging contractors responsible for replanting, or BC Timber Sales?
No, BC Timber Sales. We order our trees a couple years in advance of harvesting so that they're ready to go. Usually within a year, maximum 2 years from the time those blocks are harvested, the trees are in the ground. The new trees are in the ground.
So, 3 questions. Roughly cut block sizes, harvesting methods, and are there primary beetle concerns up there that are being dealt with?
I'm glad you asked that question. First, I'll talk about your last one. You might have reminded me about the first 2. But the last question, our operating area in Christina Lake, from a forest health perspective, is a very healthy, resilient ecosystem. You're blessed with timber types that are some of the fastest growing, the most valuable. From this area, we get some of the highest value timber. There's what we call the Kootenai mix, which means you have a huge diversity. So that's a very fortunate position to be in from a health perspective. Very little beetle just because of the mixture of species that are in there.
You're talking about your area, or?
I'm talking, yeah, because I'm not, well, I kind of have blinders on. I've been working in this area for just over 5 years, and the areas I'm most familiar with are VCTS operating areas. And as I said, those are indicated on the map at the back. So I don't like to comment on too much outside of the areas that I know best. Now, what was your first question?
Roughly cut block sizes and harvesting methods.
Yeah, very good question. Okay, the cut block sizes, we have some very small cut blocks. The smallest blocks on here, it probably range in the order of around 3 hectares, and then they go up. We're legislated to not have cut blocks greater than 40 hectares where we have a mix of species such as what we have out here. We do have some large cut blocks where we have those homogeneous pine, and then we've put in large cut blocks for forest health reasons, and also because in those ecosystems you have historical fire patterns that create these large openings. So that's the cut block, and there's one more, which was...
So in this area, it's what, 2 to 40?
About 2 to 40 hectares in size for our blocks.
Well, harvesting methods.
Harvesting.
Clear cutting?
Harvesting
Seed
methods.
swamps or... Excuse me, go ahead.
Yeah, and most of the majority of the blocks that we do harvest in BC Timber Sales today are clear cuts, and they're clear cuts with reserves. All of our blocks have some trees left behind. We're required to by legislation, but we have to have a minimum of 7% of our timber sales left behind with wildlife tree retention. There is a trend more for managing on a higher landscape view rather than a cut block level for wildlife, for ecosystems. So the trend is seems to be more away from small blocks and leaving a lot of trees out on the blocks, but looking at it more from a landscape perspective. And we work under a lot more constraints, government regulations as to where and how we can operate, and that covers off a lot of wildlife and ecosystem concerns. For example, we have old growth management areas that are restricted, we cannot harvest in. We have ungulate winter range planting cells that we have strict restrictions in, etc., etc. Yes?
Back to planting again. You mentioned that we have a mixed species forest in those areas. Do you replant with a mixed species?
You bet. You bet. It's rare that you'll see anywhere within the boundary where we plant. Actually, I can't think of any blocks that we've harvested recently that unless they're extremely dry and they were historically pure pine, we plant mixed species. And in an area like this, they'll be planting probably 4 different trees out on that site. I don't work in the field of silviculture. Tyler is the real guru when it comes to that, and he could probably tell me what is our species composition, but I know it's always a really good mix.
We have the best track record in BC for diversity for what we plant compared to other places in BC.
Other forest health issues, such like there are cut blocks historically up there with armillaria.
Yes, root rot.
So are you harvesting with that in mind? Was there any problems with that, or stumping, or?
We've done a lot of stumping over the years, and yes, we've done a lot of stumping out in the Stewardship area.
You have to speak up a little bit, Tyler.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. I was thinking more of the little creatures. Mount Pineville was always on my mind. But yeah, there is armillaria, there's root rot in here, and you have to be careful when you're working in areas that have species that are susceptible to its site, particularly Douglas fir.
And that's another case why we will mix plant with the multiple species, as through stand succession, larch, as can grow as upwards of a meter a year, right? And with a brand new stand, you'll find that the large trees will actually become infected with armillaria first. But in due time, and say 80 years down the road, since larch grows so much faster, they're able to lesion off the armillaria much more effectively. Whereas later in time, that's when the Douglas fir becomes affected. So actually, armillaria, it'll kill. I've seen it kill every tree. Cedar is actually the most resilient and resistant to the pathogen. So that's a good case why we mix plant species.
And armillaria is so innocuous in our landscape that it's everywhere, and this kind of background noise almost.
I've got 2 more questions.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I'm curious about the pricing model. Is it a lump sum or is it a fee per unit harvested? How's it structured?
There's a lot that could go into that question, but we have a base price that we put on the value of the timber, and that's calculated through our appraisal system, etc. So there's a base that we don't go below. And then when a logging contractor bids on a timber sale, they put a bonus on top of that. And so for example, there'll be a base of say $10, and they'll bid another $10 on top of that for a total of $20, and that price is per cubic meter. So as their logs flow across the scale, we're tracking how much wood is crossing that scale, and then they pay what they're owed based on the volume of wood that comes off the block. And they're required to harvest all of that volume, and what's left behind is considered waste. And they're also billed for waste.
What's the cookie mix? And the second question is, who determines what to retain, what wild
like trees to retain prior to logging?
Good question. Okay, so Kootenai mix out here. Let's see if I can. Okay, so we have Douglas fir, we have red cedar, we have hemlock, we have some lodgepole pine, we have white pine. Any commercial species I'm missing in the map? Oh yes, spruce, large. So those are our commercial conifers that I'm thinking of. Ponderosa pine. You'll find all of those except maybe ponderosa pine out in this area. Then we have our deciduous trees as well, mixed in the bunch. And I don't think I have to tell you, probably tell me there's aspen, birch, alder in there as well. So we don't harvest those. We don't harvest those. They're non-commercial species, of course. But so by Kootenai mix, we mean we're working in stands that have that whole, pretty well all of our commercial conifers and all the deciduous thrown in as well.
And who determines wildlife tree retention prior to logging?
Okay, wildlife tree retentions we do site plans on every single block. They're walked by a professional forester who signs off a plan. The people who are doing the layout and development, and they're on the ground, they're looking for wildlife tree retention areas. We have a whole practices document that's about 7 pages long that describes the criteria for a wildlife tree area retention, and they need to be familiar with that, and they're chosen very consciously, and usually within, if they've got a habitat feature, they try to tie those in with habitat features, and there's a whole bunch of guidelines that help them decide.
So, who does the retention of that forest? Is it the BC Tree Service or is it the logging company?
So that retention is marked on the ground and ribboned out.
Oh.
So a logger doesn't go near it.
Okay.
And sometimes there's scattered trees across the block. Sometimes they're clumped, but they're marked.
BC Timber Sales does.
That's it.
Oh, BC Timber Sales. Yes, sorry.
That was the question.
Yeah, that's well. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you very, very much. We probably keep you going for quite some time yet. So thanks a lot, Don, for being here. Okay, so your next presentation you're going to hear is all about the Kettle River. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Graham Watt. Graham is working with the RDKB currently on the Kettle River Watershed. And I work closely with Graham because I chair one of those committees. And I tell you, if you ever have any computer problems, if you want to know how to put something together, if you want it done yesterday, if you even want to go through an agenda and have it done 2 minutes later, you need to contact Graham, because I'll tell you what, I am so proud of this young man. So please help me welcome Graham Watt.
Thank you, Grace. Presentation done. No. So today I'm going to talk about the Kettle River Watershed Management Plan with particular focus on findings of our recent State of the Kettle River Watershed, which was done by Summit Environmental. Can everyone hear me all right, or do you need to have like right on the lips? No, it's all right? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to give an overview of the planning process and try and bring people up to date about where we're at in the planning. I'm sure some of you received and answered surveys. I saw a lot of action coming in from Christina Lake, so that's great. And then look at a few focal questions around the state of the watershed that have been coming up a lot. So I'll leave a little bit of time open at that point for seeing if there's anything else that people would like to talk about. So my kind of background in watershed management planning, I've been at this for a few years, and I had the chance to look at what factors of success are there. And often watershed management plans come about because of a key challenge, whether it's water scarcity or flooding, water quality, that kind of thing. And at some point, there will be the mandate to go forth and plan. Decision makers and leaders will actually take it seriously. But it can be several years sometimes before an actual level of support, both in staff and resources, money, is there to help support the planning process. Once you have that in place, though, then you have to start tackling understanding. So what do we know? What do we not know? what do people understand, and how can we start to come to a common understanding of what the watershed is. And finally, a lot of the solutions, everything that we institute, will have to actually address the capacity, the means to deliver on the understanding and the support that's there. Any one of these ingredients that's missing or ill-considered, I guess, can sometimes mean that we've missed the boat or something won't work well. But where I worked in Alberta, the mandate came in 2003 and the funding came in 2007, so that was a bit of a gap right there. But I'm really excited to be working with the regional district on this project because from what I can see, they get this incredibly well. From the very beginning, I've seen that understanding of watershed planning as part of the municipal-led process. So our watershed is, you can see Christina Lake right here where you're just looking at the map. We're essentially, the same map that we were just showing for the timber sales there, of course, extending far north up to Highway 6 and west out to west of Rock Creek, down into the states as well, Myers Creek, Torota Creek, and that kind of thing. Our watershed plan didn't consider, or the phase 1 study didn't consider the area remaining after the border, but it's certainly part of our watershed as well. The initiative, the regional district's initiative was to do 2 phases of work to study water supply, use, quality, and the aquatic ecosystem. That's our phase 1 state of the watershed. I have a copy of it with me and it's now available on the web at that address, state of the watershed. And what I'm here to do is plan for the future and work with stakeholders across the region to develop recommendations on policy and planning and stewardship of our water resources. And it's overall a 2-year process to understand watershed issues, and that's both from the technical standpoint from the state of the watershed and other studies, and understand watershed issues from stakeholder perspective. So how many people here got the survey and answered it? Wow, awesome. That's great to see. And I'm sure anyone else who hasn't, or if you know people who haven't, it's still up online, and that's the best way to enter it now because that way I don't have to enter it. And when I start my analysis a little bit later this month, it'll be included in there. It's good to keep it open for a while. And then next, we'll be looking at all that stakeholder input and the science we have available and start developing goals and objectives and priorities. That's the work of the stakeholder advisory group. And it's going to be really exciting because we have to build on this basic understanding we're making and actually get down to what might be some hard decisions, which are made in the next step of what recommendations will actually be coming in this plan. So over the next several months, we'll know what our priorities are, what we'll be addressing directly in the plan, and following that, we'll be making recommendations on those priorities. By early 2014, there will be a draft watershed plan that we'll be discussing and going into implementation planning later on in the spring. It's an ambitious schedule, and I'll probably push everyone hard at some points, but it's quite exciting right now because we're learning a lot about each other and about the issues here. I have to say, this is an absolute incredible network of people, and there's formal networks and informal networks that are kind of behind this, but the Watershed Steering Committee is the elected officials at the regional district, and Mark Anderson, who brought this together in the first place and found funding and found the commitment to lead this locally. They brought together, and that's chaired by Bill Barrett from Area E. The Technical Advisory Committee helped support the state of the watershed over a number of meetings last year, and going into our current work is helping us advise us on further technical studies that we need, and will be helping us with some of the recommendations, certainly. Grace, as you mentioned, chairs our stakeholder advisory group, which is roughly 30, more or less, people who some of whom you see in the picture here, are here to actually learn about the watershed issues and help give advice on the recommendations that we'll be developing. So, people from Big White all the way down to the center of the watershed are represented, and it's an incredibly good group of, I should say, also very busy people, so I'm incredibly thankful that they're able to participate. And we have a lot of public members and people of other groups who are related, who want to be in on the loop and connected with what we're doing. So I'm trying to shepherd this large group into the process and respecting where they're at, of course. But,
Looks like Stan's.
So, anybody ever heard the term wicked problems? Wicked problems? Okay, so the idea of wicked problem is where there's different explanations and different solutions that come up with those explanations. So it's something, global warming is one of those. I think riparian management could be one as well, because depending on who you're talking to and whose interests are there, the questions that you ask and the worldviews that are behind those questions, the assumptions, those will determine your explanations, which will then determine your solutions. And so coming into the middle of it as a planner, I'm trying to understand all of the different perspectives and all of the different explanations that people have for the problem and therefore for the solution. And hopefully that way when we come to recommendations on some of these really tricky problems, we'll actually be able to have at least some common ground behind it. The last wicked problem I dealt with in the prairies, and I don't know if it's successful, we'll see, is wetland drainage and wetland restoration. So I think there's some similar kinds of issues here. Tools for understanding. So this is shifting into the main focus of the talk now on the state of the watershed. And 3 big questions that we use to kind of guide us in the technical knowledge. What's going on, so that's our state of the watershed, our monitoring, mapping, etc. How is it working? There can be some modeling and some kinds of assessment in there. And then some really exciting stuff, scenario analysis. What if we grow tenfold in a certain resource area? Or what if mining increases? Or what if the population increases? Or what if irrigation conservation is increased? What happens in the future to our system with those things that come around? So that's those will be some of the understandings that our technical advisory committee will be helping us with, and we'll be reporting on here. Scope of the watershed, state of the watershed, there's a watershed description, kind of overview of soil, topography, etc. Water quantity, flow, and use, both surface and groundwater. Water quality, surface and groundwater. Aquatic ecosystem, mainly on fisheries, and data gaps, both gaps in knowledge about these items as well as things that we don't have a lot of information on, which we'll come to at the end of the talk. So I get to hear a lot of different questions and concerns, and these ones come up a lot. Are the river flows declining? What will climate change bring? Are we using too much water? What are our impacts on groundwater, and what are our impacts on aquatic ecosystems? So, anything else come to mind for people? Any other questions that are you really burning thinking about the watershed?
It's a lot, but we'll be right there.
That's a lot. If you're happy with that, we'll go. We'll go. So, touching on a few of these with some images now. I will use the mouse, so I might just sort of squat a little bit here so I've got stable. So this is the August flow record just downstream here at Laurier from 1930 all the way to 2010. And so you can see the average August flow here is at 22.4 cubic meters a second. So this is like a cubic meter sort of here. You can imagine that a typical August flow. From 2000 to 2010, was very, very dry. It was the lowest flow decade on record. The next slide shows this basically the same data by decade. And the lowest flow and the lowest variability for August flows. Of course, there's some real big peaks in the past, and that skews that average upwards a little bit. But this really does help us know what happens when the flows decline. So for instance, during that decade, we had several years with fish kills reported. Whitefish in particular is susceptible to these warm temperatures. Once you get up to, that come along with low flows, but certainly are now directly related. I know the critical temperatures up above 18 degrees. The river's been up 24, 25 recently, and I hear the lake's been up to 25, so definitely something to think about with climate change there. But the last 2 years of data, I just downloaded this the other day. We are now back to median flows, back to average flows essentially. The orange line here is median, and the blue line is recorded flow just downstream at Laurier. And you can actually see how much the river came up the last few weeks here in November. So it really spiked well above normal again after being well below normal for a while. So it's sort of getting back to the question of are they declining? And over the whole record, there isn't actually a decline either in annual average flows or in August flows. If you look at the last 30 years or so, there's a very, very slight decline in August flows. But over the 1930 to 2010, there isn't. We know about dry weather and several years of drought through our last period, and that can help us inform what happens during droughts in the future for sure. But we're back to normal. And what does the future bring? And I think that's a bigger question than any of us can get to right now, but we've seen it lately. There's very warm weather. November was 2 degrees above normal, I think, for most of BC, and a lot more winter rainfall as opposed to snow. So they talk about switching from a snow-dominated to a mixed watershed, mixed regime watershed, where you've got a lot more rain happening. And this could bring earlier and potentially higher freshet. So this is modeling that was done for the watershed, which is just to our north. And basically, if this is the long-term average here, all of the climate models show a peakier, earlier spring flow in that watershed. It's not certain that that's exactly what will happen here, and it totally depends on the year, of course. But that longer growing season, if we have an earlier earlier freshet and longer growing season, means that longer period with low flows that we might have to address. So we want to think about the implications of that very carefully. Maybe lower precipitation and higher temperatures during the summertime. How will that affect our water usage? Of course, there's a greater reliance on aquifers and stored water as the dry season lengthens. And potentially there's increases to flooding damage and changes to river morphology, but it's hard to tease out exactly how this will happen. And certainly increased stresses on the aquatic ecosystem. I won't go in depth into the results of the licensing and use analysis, but there's a lot in the report on that, so please do consult that. But overall, the available water from surface water is over-allocated in the late summer. So essentially, there isn't really room for a bunch of new surface water to be used in the late summer. But only about half, depending on the year, sometimes lower, sometimes higher, of surface licenses are actually used, depending on the year once again. So many licensees have switched to groundwater, which, as you know, is unregulated. So there's a bit of a picture. We've gone from sort of one regulated surface water system to a very tightly connected groundwater system where most people have switched to that. So generally, though, there is a surplus of water in spring months, but a deficit in fall, late summer and fall. A couple of, I guess, worry points here. In very dry years, for instance, 2003, the total summer water use is actually higher than river flows. So this could be alarming. So I'll just point to how you look at this on the graph. So this is the mean September flow for across all the different subbasins. It's cumulative, except for Granby and Boundary Creeks are their own in there, I believe. And this is at Laurie's, the last subbasin here. And so the net flow versus the naturalized flow, this is what would be in the river if we weren't taking anything out of the river or groundwater. And down here is the net flow of what was actually observed. And then if you look at the 10-year and 50-year low flow, so 2003 was a 1 in 83-year low flow for August. But in a 1 in 50-year, for instance, there's less water here, 2 cubic meters a second, than the difference between the net flow and the naturalized, so in terms of total use. I mean, we're using in that year more than there is in the river. So any ideas why the river didn't run dry completely? There?
I water 100 acres right next to the river. I take water right out of the river.
Right.
A large percentage of that goes back in the river.
Okay, there's a good one. A lot goes back in directly. And any other thoughts on why the river didn't go dry?
Groundwater.
Yes, groundwater. So the groundwater, as I'll get into in a moment, is a huge reservoir that takes a large amount of the spring freshet, and then contributes it back slowly over the season. So we'll get onto that now. But definitely implications for fish and aquatic ecosystems if we're using a lot of groundwater. So as we notice, most of the people in the watershed and economic activity depends to some degree on groundwater now. All of our areas, aside from a few out here, I believe, are using groundwater. And for Grand Forks, we have an incredibly well-studied aquifer. We get what's going on there, but across the watershed, that's not the same case. There's one other monitoring well at Beaverdale, but it's pretty spotty everywhere else. This is a sort of, I guess, 10-year period of data for an observation well down in the industrial area in Grand Forks that you can see basically that the observation well elevation tracks the peak, tracks the flows in the river with just a slight lag essentially. And so over time they've looked at the data, there isn't a long-term trend in the Grand Forks aquifer and at this observation well. And there's a very, very slight downward trend in Beaverdale one. Now, of course, being connected to the river is one thing. We're also, with our aquifers and surficial materials, we're very susceptible to activities on the surface. This is a map of nitrogen levels, milligrams per liter in the Grand Forks aquifer. Just to get your bearings here. Here's Carson Road, and here's where it turns into Gilpin Road right here, so just kind of the east end of the valley. We live just to the west of that, or Grand Forks Irrigation District water. And someone remind me the guidelines for aquatic health, for drinking water for nitrate is 10, yeah. So up to 30, greater than 30, there's some potential risks here. It goes up and down, but you probably heard or probably saw the headlines in is that recently about Grand Forks, and that was just about community wells. So that comment from Murray Albert was just about the community wells in Grand Forks itself, as opposed to the overall aquifer. Now there were some numbers reported there as well that showed kind of the range, and there is, I think, still some cause for concern. There's more questions I'd like to ask about the groundwater for sure. It's a hugely valuable resource for us, right? And it does act as a reservoir. So I think the message that we'll be looking at is how do we recommend managing this reservoir? We're all sitting on top of it, dumping things in it, and having our straws in it. So what do we need to be careful of, and what do we need to do in the future? It does appear to be renewed from year to year, and is tightly connected to both surface water and surface activities. Water ecosystems. The sport fishery has had a tough time over the years. Actually, I've used more than my 20 minutes here, so that's kind of a tough time too. But the seasonal low flow is well below critical habitat thresholds in dry years. So that when the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations has been studying the Kettle River and its fisheries very well the last few years, they've been looking at habitat conditions, looking at stock assessments. It's great to have these kind of studies happening while we're doing our studies, so it complements the work that's certainly in our state of the watershed. So there's a number of different issues that contribute to the sport fishery, but I think we'll be getting some more good information from Tara White and her colleagues at the ministry there in the coming months. There is 2 preliminary reports from 2011 and 2010 to 2011 data, and those are on our website on the same page as the study. And the last topic is on riparian ecosystems. So what I've been hearing in conversations with people, and also through the survey results that I've entered so far, there's a really high level of concern across the watershed about riparian conditions. And people are talking about shoreline development, they're talking about range management and the impacts around cattle and that kind of thing. They're talking about forestry, access to land-based recreation. So there's so many different factors, and different ones are at play depending on whether you're public land versus private land. And there's certainly a lot of evidence, anecdotal evidence, and some in person for sure, a few site-specific stuff about degraded riparian areas. But overall, comprehensively, we don't have good data on this. We've got some very good stuff around Christina Lake, and there's some recent cottonwood habitat work done by Jenny. But we need more information, and we also need to consider the explanations, the issues from different management perspectives. And so what we're doing this December is starting a riparian working group of resource management specialists, a biologist, ranchers, foresters, people from different perspectives to help gather any other available data, put it together, make sense of what the questions are, and it certainly includes Christina Lake as well, and help determine what studies we can do in the future as well. Perhaps find some money for those studies. And then their role as we go forward in the plan is to help consider the policy and planning needs and study the management recommendations that will be considered by the stakeholder advisory group. So they're basically going to be some horsepower behind the riparian issue to help it make up for the fact that we don't have as much good information on that as we do, say, on flows. So I'm really excited about this because I think there's going to be some very concrete things coming from their work. Other next steps down the road, we'll be looking at future growth, water supply and demand scenarios. If there's continues to be a significant interest in storage, both surface and groundwater storage, we need to understand that area as well. So we'll probably have a few meetings specifically on storage opportunities. Very excited about a water-wise water conservation education program, helping promote and understand and promote water stewardship in the watershed, and that will help definitely with a lot of our education needs, but perhaps as well bringing some targeted incentives as well for some new programs there, and some other studies that will be coming that are recommended by the State of the Watershed and Technical Advisory Committee. I keep on reminding myself not to get too excited and keep the eye on the prize, which is developing the watershed plan in the next couple of years. But I think there's a lot of ongoing work here that we can sink our teeth into. So, any questions? Okay. Sorry.
That's a water question mark.
Yes.
That's a watermark.
It's a watermark. Okay, we'll start here.
I haven't heard anything for quite some time. Where does the Cascade Falls Dam project stand?
I actually don't know anything about it. Grace does.
I'll fill you in on that. They did ask for a 5-year extension. They're allowed to ask for one 5-year extension. I think we're into the second year of that 5-year extension. So we continue to hold our breath and hope that they don't sell it to someone else, because that, I believe, has been the plan, and that it remains exactly the way it is.
Succinct.
I thought so.
Hi. So I'm a planner in training as part of the girl. I'm fairly new, so forgive my ignorance here. So
I'm new too.
Okay, regional district Kootenai boundary is the lead on this Kettle watershed management.
That's right.
So my first question is the scope. Like, I'm a little bit, what I'm getting out of the presentation is that regional district has jurisdiction over rural private land, and somehow through this study they're also working with municipalities, because it's obviously the waters. And mostly what I'm getting out of this is that you're looking at your water. You've got studies all about the rivers themselves, and so like fish, water, all of that kind of stuff. We're calling this a watershed management plan, and obviously I'm representing forestry, and this is my next part. So I got your scope. What I'm confused about now is the scale of stuff.
The scope of recommendations and what it will touch. Absolutely.
And so we're doing forestry, and of course, what we do out there definitely influences the watershed. We've got people on, like you heard us talking about hydrologists, like we take this stuff seriously. We've got people on the ground in certain locations, not everywhere in the watershed.
Right, and where you got activities, that's it.
Yeah, related to our activities, walking, how would that feed into work that you're doing, if at all? Because I don't really totally get what the watershed management is going to cover.
Okay, we'll answer that too. We'll start with the second part because it's great, and then I'll probably hand the microphone over to Mark in a moment because he can. They're laughing about this because but in terms of the technical information, the resource management knowledge, we're hungry for that, right? So if there's site-specific work that contributes to our larger picture of how things are doing, like in terms of resilience of streams, as you spoke about in the presentation, right? If you have a cumulative picture of how that's adding up, we're keenly interested because it might help fill in some of the gaps that we haven't been able to fill so far in terms of knowledge about conditions on the ground. It might need to be scaled up from that sort of sub-basin level to something larger. And I was interested in the comments that you made about how some of these issues are addressed at a broader scale now. So how, from a watershed perspective, is timber sales and FLNRO looking at watershed scale issues in resource management planning? I think that's where we could definitely have a conversation as well about how to look at those priorities that are being addressed in our group as well as yours. So both studies and also priorities, I think we want to have further conversations. In terms of jurisdiction, I'm going to pass it over to Mark, and is the Director of Planning, and can speak to some of that.
Yeah, I guess we need to provide a little history on how this watershed management plan came to be. There were a few issues. One of them was raised already, the Cascade project, as well as a couple of others, including simply diminishing water flows in the river that were raising a number of concerns with people throughout the watershed. The Regional District Board had lobbied as a result of the French government to do a watershed management plan for the Kettle. And as a result of that lobbying, we got together with a number of agency representatives as well as John Slater, the MLA, to consider how we might undertake something like that. The province, unfortunately, at the time, didn't have any resources available to do a watershed management plan. The board determined as a result that the regional district could take the lead on the project with the support of the province. So right from the beginning, we've had a technical advisory committee that Graham has mentioned, involved intimately in the project, and there have been a number of representatives from the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations, both from water licensing, habitat, as well as somebody from forestry that's been on the technical advisory committee, although he's recently retired, so we're going to have to fill that position. And so the regional district is using mainly funding through gas tax revenues that we have to do green projects to fund this watershed management plan project. The first step in doing the watershed management plan was to determine in terms of reference, what is the scope of work that we're going to get involved in, and what's the goal of the plan ultimately. And working with the various agency representatives, there was a real concern about, okay, what role is this watershed management plan going to play? Because there are some overlaps with particularly water management jurisdiction that we have limited jurisdiction on. We have a lot of jurisdiction in terms of land use planning and all sorts of stuff in terms of water use, but not licensing and other things. So it's determined right from the start, and the provincial agency representatives were involved in the establishment in terms of reference for the project, that this would act as a guide for resource managers within the watershed and local governments. So local governments could do whatever was within their jurisdiction to introduce policies, regulations, to do anything around, whether it's riparian area management or land use planning, to effectively implement the plan. Watershed managers could do the same, but they wouldn't be necessarily legislatively bound by the plan. So somebody who, for example, Conrad Price, who's in charge of water licensing in the Kettle watershed, could use this document to determine whether to issue a particular license or not, depending on the policies and direction that are outlined in the plan. So that's the intent. It's intended to provide a guide for resource managers operating within the watershed, as well as a guide for local governments and individuals in terms of how they conduct their action within the watershed. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, thank you. I'll get your card at the end. Okay. Any other questions?
Okay.
All right, it's the end of the day.
Thank you very much. Okay, there is another comment that I want to make, because you know that we've been making a CD on this. They are available. Last year's and this year's are available through the Stewardship, so if you want to pass that information on. I would like to ask our MLA, John Slater, if he would kindly say a few words on what he's working on currently, or maybe update you on the water issue act. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Grace, and it's good to be here. This is my third year at this meeting, and it's good to see so many people keenly interested in our issues in the boundary area. I found it interesting. Earlier today, we were talking about amphibian crossings, and all you have to do is move the sign away so that they cross somewhere else. Right? It's being funny. Anyway, what we did in the Okanagan, we had a project down at the head of the lake of Vesuvius Lake, and we actually put culverts under the highway, and the amphibians go underneath and in through those culverts, and it's worked really well. Like you say, otherwise you've seen all the toads and salamanders, critters all being crushed on the roads, and we found that it was not cheap. I think it was $600,000 or some stupid thing.
Did you get help from the province?
Yeah, we did. and that's my point. I mean, if you have a plan, put it together. If that area ever gets repaved or something like that, then you can do stuff like that. So again, I'll keep this short and keep working with us. Grace is always a thorn in my back. She needs stuff, she phones. So between Diana and myself, we try and address all the issues in the area. So again, thanks very much for having me.
Thanks, John. He did say it all. I do call him quite a bit, but I'll tell you, I thought he liked me. The realities, right? Okay, so open forum time. Do you have any questions of anyone, myself, anybody else that's been involved in this whole process today? Before I start on the list of thank yous.
Dare I make another question?
Sure, of course you can.
When the forestry map went up, there were little blue dots for water intakes. Well, hello, where are all the intakes for all the water systems along the lake shore that aren't supplied by the Christina Waterworks, or because of the Southern Creek, or Deer Park, or Alpine? Where were they?
Yeah, I think they were referring to what they were working with at the time, right?
What we were showing on those maps, those are licensed water intakes. Yeah. And if you do not have a license, if you're pulling water out of some of these streams or without a license, we don't address those. You need a license for us to be aware of who you are and where you are. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I think what's important, is to also understand that their job is to talk about the cut blocks that they're dealing with and the areas that they're going to be logging. So it wasn't about the whole of Christina Lake and all of the water intakes in the whole of Christina Lake towns, just the areas that they were involved with.
Yeah, I see some of the lots go right down to the lake shore, or they appear to be to the lake shore. You're not logging those areas, but there are water intakes there. People suck their water out of Christina Lake.
Yeah, but it wasn't in the area they were logging. Okay. So that's her job.
But you talk about licenses. Do you have to have a license to take water out of the lake?
You don't. Well, I'm not sure about water coming out of the lake because we're more concerned with the water that is going into the lake because it flows through ground that we're operating on. And I'm not too sure about water licensing in general.
Yes, you do have to have a license to take water to life. That's the simplicity of it.
Really?
Uh-oh. Excuse me, but no one's seen the lady dressed in purple. Okay, any more questions? And really, there's contact information for all of these people. They're very easy to contact, and they're always more than willing to talk to us. All of you guys that presented, we so value your time, believe me.
First, I'd like to say thank you for welcoming us here today. I'm intrigued by the fact that I haven't heard any reference to mining and mining interests or representation here at this meeting today. What is the explanation for that?
Yeah, you're right. There is, though, some mining interests in here. Not too long ago, that came across our desk, and Mark could actually fill you in on that, because the request for addresses went out, because anybody that's going back to look at their mines and crossing other people's property have to contact those people's property that they were crossing. In fact, when I was a child, I lived up on top where there's a trailer park now, and there's a mine up there, and they're re-looking at that right now. So, Mark, do you want to do you know how many they're looking at? No? Do you want to add to that information? No. Okay, nothing more to add. All right. Okay.
In our watershed plan, we do have a contact. We actually have mapped out all the there's different types of mines. We don't have placer, can't do placer, the stream stuff here, but there is a lot of mining activity and claims here. So we have the maps and a whole listing of all the mines and who has the license or the permitting and who's got surface rates and who's got under surface rates and all that other stuff. And we just keep in contact with them, and that's all. Their laws are above everybody else's, basically, right? So they were nice enough to give us that, and that's all we have.
The miners and the fish.
The miners.
Go ahead.
And my last question is, what role, if any, did the First Nations, who have traditional territories, I'm sure here as throughout the province, have? How were they engaged, or were they not engaged in the development of the plan?
This plan, Brenda?
Okay. We have, Heidi McGregor's not here today, but we went through the Sinaiaks, Marilyn James, we went through the Tunaka, we went through everybody to say, where are you going to be doing treaty negotiations, where are your territorial rights, who wants to come on board. So we did have First Nations representation throughout this whole system. This is the first year that Heidi has not been able to come to this meeting, and we went through Okanagan Nations Alliance, and we had everybody sign off on the watershed plan through the First Nations.
That's really an important process. Really, truly it is. Okay, any more questions? Everybody want to go home, right? Okay, so first of all, of course, thank you for all of you being here. But really, we really owe a debt of gratitude to the Christina Lake Stewardship and everything that they do. Everything, believe me. If we didn't have the province at the table and we didn't have all of the people who work with the province, we'd be in dire straits, because it takes all of us working together to create what we created and continue to create, because it's a living document. It'll tie in so well with the Kettle River study that, we're going to have an overall picture that's absolutely incredible. I want to say thank you for being here, and thank you for the presentation on what you're going to be dealing with, because really, truly, we all care. And if you could stand up here and talk with us about that, it is so good, truly. So thanks for that. Thank you to Twisted Forks, who did your lunch. We were remiss, we should have all been out here and clapped for him. Barb Stewart, the wee lady, always operating a little bit of everything. And so, and to the filmer. So I could go on and on and on. Thanks to the regional district, thanks to everybody. But I won't quit there. So go forth, have a good Christmas, stay safe, and we'll see you in 2013.